What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and today I'm going to be showing you how to put together a $1,200 gaming PC build with all the parts behind me. I'm going to put this thing together, run through all the parts I selected and why, before booting it up to see how exactly it performs in some of the most popular titles. Without any further ado though, let's jump into it. As always, I'm going to start off by installing our CPU and our RAM into the motherboard. Specifically, this is a B550 motherboard from ASUS ROG. ASUS do some great Ryzen motherboards, including this B550F gaming board and this slightly cheaper TUF board, and I'll link both options in the description below. To install your CPU, find the golden triangle on the processor here and line that up with the triangle on the top left of your motherboard's CPU socket. You then want to take the processor and easily drop it into place. You shouldn't have to force it or push it in before popping the arm back down. This 6-core 12-thread CPU is AMD's Ryzen 5 3600, and it's the perfect choice for today's build. I'm going to couple it with this RAM from Thermaltake, who very kindly sent over a few components for today's build. This is 16 gigabytes of their TOUGHRAM RGB. To install your RAM, you need to pull back the clips on the 2nd and 4th RAM DIMM slots and line the notch on your memory up with the notch on your motherboard. And click it down with even pressure to both sides. Repeat for as many RAM DIMMs as you've got. And just like that, we're all sorted. I'm going to install our CPU cooler later, so it's easy to pop our motherboard into the case. Specifically, this is the Thermaltake H550 tempered glass, as you can hear, and we've even got a bit of peel action. After removing the two case side panels, go ahead and grab the included bag of case accessories from this hard drive cage at the rear of the chassis. In that bag, you'll find these screws, which we're going to use to install our motherboard down into place. It's also a good time to double check that under each of the holes through your motherboard, we've got a standoff pre-installed into our case. For today's build, we're all set. Slide the motherboard in to our chassis, and I think I'm going to place it kind of on its back. Next up today then, we've got this, our CPU cooler. This Thermaltake UX200 also fits super well with our color scheme today. Even professional PC builders are going to need the manual for this step. This is actually super simple. You just need to peel this little film off, pop a little blob of thermal paste onto our CPU, and then fasten these little metal clips over the pre-installed plastic motherboard mounting hardware. Start off by clipping the top one into place, and then just grab the bottom toggle and really give it a bit of welly, and that's going nowhere. Finally, we need to secure our fan down with these little metal fastener things. And just like that, we're sorted. Happy days. With our CPU cooler all installed, I'm next up gonna pop in our power supply. This is also from Thermaltake, and it's RGB, which is kind of insane. Oh yeah, it's got that new power supply smell, as if I just said that. Specifically, this is their Smart RGB 700 watts. We're going to install it fan facing downwards, which will allow fresh air to flow in from the bottom of the case and should also give us a nice RGB underglow. And for anyone wondering, these are the screws that I'm using. Before plugging up our motherboard and CPU power cables, I'm also using these super cheap power supply sleeved cable extensions, which I'll link as well in the description below. Finally, on the cabling front, I'm going to pop in some of our front panel cables, and these make all the ports and buttons on the top of the case basically work at all. First up is our HD audio cable. It goes to the bottom left of the motherboard and has a pin blocked out, so we'll only go in kind of one orientation. USB 2 looks virtually identical but has a different pin missing and is labelled, and that goes in the middle of your motherboard. Closely followed by USB 3. This is normally blue and has a notch. It is a bit more sensitive with the kind of pins being more delicate, so do be careful with this one. And then finally, we've also got our front panel power, reset, hard drive LED indicators and all that fun stuff. If you get these wrong, don't worry, though I'll put a diagram on your screen now to try and follow along and get it right first time around. sound. With that wrapped up, we're going to install our final component before we move on to our graphics card. And this is our storage today. I've opted for a 1TB SSD from Kingston. Great value, means we can have fully solid state storage in today's build, which is going to make everything that much quicker, including loading games up, so you haven't got to mess about and you can get straight into it. I'm going to remove one of these SSD mounts from the back of the motherboard and line the screw holes on each corner of the bottom of the drive up with these cutouts on the mounting plate. I'm then going to use the same screws we installed our motherboard with to very fiddlily, that's not a word, to very precisely is what I should say, secure the drive into place. Then grab one of the SATA cables that comes with your motherboard and slot this into the bottom of the drive. We're going to do the same with this SATA power cable before securing it back down into place. And don't forget to plug the other end of the SATA cable into your motherboard, just like so. Finally then, it's now time for our graphics card. And this is the ASUS Dual RX 5700 XT. Ooh, this is a weird packing design. Ah, bingo. Oh, look at that. For one of the better value RX 5700 XT cards, this looks so good. To install our graphics card, we're going to shadow it over our PCIe slot, which is going to tell us to remove the second and third PCIe slot covers before removing this cover and sliding our graphics card into our motherboard with a satisfying click sound and securing it back down with those same PCIe slot cover screws. Go ahead and plug your power cable in, whether that be directly from the power supply or with these extensions we talked about earlier. And I think we're then ready to actually whack that back side panel on and boot this machine up to see how it looks, but more importantly, how it performs. Roll the montage. Alright then, now that you've seen just how good this system looks when it's all powered up, and of course the process of putting it together, let's see exactly how it performs. I've taken 7 of the most popular and some of the latest titles around and tested them at 1440p. Overwatch is the first on the list, 1440p ultra settings. You're looking in the region of 160 to 170 frames per second. On top of that as well, the game looks fantastic. I mean, Overwatch never fails to disappoint, but to be able to get this kind of esports level frame rate with a really great 1440p high settings experience is fantastic. Call of Duty's Warzone is next up, arguably the most popular game at the moment. 1440p high settings, you're looking at 120 plus frames per second. You could quite easily get 140 or 150 by either toning some of the settings down at 1440p or jumping down to 1080p if that's the kind of frame rate you're after. Valorant performs insanely well. You guys have been asking for Valorant for ages, and now it's out of beta, I've included it. 1440p high settings, we're looking 150 FPS minimum and sometimes over 200 frames per second. Valorant really reminds me of like CSGO, but if it had been made 10 years later. I know some people are going to hate that comparison, but the game looks great and is a load of fun. Oh, and it performs super well. Next up is Forza Horizon 4, I think the best looking racing game out there. Not necessarily the most realistic, but at 1440p ultra settings on the ultra preset, you're looking at 120 plus frames per second. And that's tested in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode. And that means you can go back and compare my other builds to see, how they perform. Apex Legends is next up, 1440p high settings. You're looking in the region of 120 frames per second. Apex Legends is quite volatile. The different scenes and different environments have big differences in frame rate, but the overall performance picture here is really, really good. GTA 5 is a bit of an old classic. It's pretty undefeated at this point, and in terms of performance, it's not the easiest game to run. Nevertheless, 1440p high settings, we're looking 80 to 110 frames per second in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode. Next up, we have got a little bit of Fortnite. Whenever I don't include this, you guys go mental. And even if I do, you don't realise it's there and also go mental. But 1440p high and kind of epic settings, a bit of a mix of the two, you're looking 125 plus frames per second. Fortnite's one of those games that I kind of just write off, and then when I boot it up to benchmark, I end up playing it for like 2 hours. It's super addictive, it's super fun, and I can see why some people still love it after all this time. Talking of loving it after all this time, see, that was an awful segue. CSGO, a really popular title, 1440p, high settings, over 250 frames per second. As you're probably expecting, CSGO is not a difficult game to run, but this machine has got it on lock. With that being said though, that pretty much wraps it up for today's GeekaWhat video. If you did enjoy, make sure to smash that like button and get subscribed for more from me. Thank you very much for watching though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.